What if the world's most powerful financial institution was openly hosting a session on how to fundamentally reset the global trade system? That might sound like a wild internet conspiracy theory, but on April 9, 2026, the International Monetary Fund is doing exactly that at their Washington, D.C. headquarters. The post-war economic order is fracturing under the weight of geopolitical conflict and unprecedented energy shocks. And while retail investors are distracted by short-term market volatility, global elites are already building a programmable replacement for the dying fiat system. My name is Louis, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. On April 9th, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, will host a highly publicized curtain-raiser session titled Policies Amid a Reset of the International Trade and Financial Systems. The deliberate use of that specific terminology in a formal session title is a notable semantic choice for an organization that usually relies on diplomatic language. They are formally acknowledging that the traditional banking cartel is undergoing a permanent structural transformation rather than a cyclical disruption. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva recently addressed this exact theme at a symposium in Tokyo, warning that the global economy is facing continuous compounding shocks. She noted that the institution is actively analyzing the potential impact of these geopolitical shifts on member countries. And following this unprecedented curtain raiser, the IMF will drop its highly anticipated World Economic Outlook report on April 14th. This release will arrive at a moment of catastrophic institutional disagreement regarding the actual trajectory of the United States economy. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, recently published an interim report projecting American headline inflation to reach 4.2% by the end of 2026. That represents a worrying upward revision, driven almost entirely by severe energy price shocks and sustained global supply chain disruptions. Furthermore, the implementation of new trade tariffs under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 is projected to cost the average American household approximately $1,500 this year. However, the Federal Reserve's recent summary of economic projections insists that inflation will magically settle at just 2.7% over the exact same time frame. That 150 basis point gap between two major financial authorities is not some minor statistical rounding error, but the difference between an uncomfortable economic landing and a genuine stagflation crisis that destroys the purchasing power of everyday users. If the OECD's projections prove accurate, well, the Federal Reserve is sitting dangerously behind the curve and will be forced into emergency policy reversals. And the broader market is already pricing in this exact scenario, with futures contracts currently showing a 52% probability of a rate hike by the end of the year. The underlying economic data reveals exactly why the Fed is trapped in a genuine dual mandate nightmare. Recent employment reports showed a devastating loss of 92,000 jobs in February alone, marking the fourth monthly decline in 9 months. Simultaneously, the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index plunged by 14% following the outbreak of war in the Middle East. When you combine rising energy-driven inflation with a rapidly weakening labor market, you have the exact textbook conditions for a stagflation crisis. And speaking of tracking these massive institutional policy shifts before they hit the mainstream headlines, this is exactly why you need the Coin Bureau Telegram channel. It's where we share the latest breaking news, provide deep dive alpha, and give you the most important market updates, all pinged directly to your device so that you don't miss a thing. So sign up today using the link down below or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Now, let's look at the underlying mechanical reality that is forcing the International Monetary Fund to openly discuss a structural reset. For decades, the absolute gold standard of international trade has been the petrodollar system, which required global energy markets to settle exclusively in United States dollars. But that monopoly is currently disintegrating at an astonishing speed across multiple geopolitical fault lines. In March 2026, Indian refiners successfully settled approximately 60 million barrels of Russian crude oil without touching the legacy financial system. Instead of relying on Western correspondent banks, Indian Oil Corporation and other major refiners used specialized overseas accounts to process payments. They deposited local rupees into these accounts, which were then converted directly into Chinese yuan and UAE dirhams to finalize the transactions. This massive volume of crude was legally processed during a temporary 30-day United States sanctions waiver window that expires in early April. The political paradox of this situation is crazy when you analyze the regulatory timeline. The Trump administration was forced to issue a temporary waiver allowing India to continue purchasing Russian oil to stabilize global energy prices. The exact same government that previously threatened massive penalty tariffs to stop these sanctions is now issuing emergency exemptions to prevent a global supply collapse. When the world's third largest oil consumer demonstrates that non-dollar settlement is operationally viable at massive scale, it constitutes a fatal stress test for the entire dollar hegemony. But the most aggressive assault on the traditional finance architecture is currently unfolding inside the Strait of Hormuz. Following recent military escalations, Iranian authorities established a heavily regulated transit corridor near Larak Island, demanding massive transit fees for safe passage. Traffic through this critical maritime choke point has plummeted by 90% since the conflict began. Vessels seeking to navigate this restricted energy corridor are being forced to pay up to $2 million per individual voyage. The Iranian Parliament Security Committee is actively drafting formal legislation to permanently codify this fee structure into their national law. And the truly devastating detail is not the exorbitant price tag, but the specific financial network required to process that payment. Shipping companies are settling these seven-figure transit fees in Chinese yuan, routed specifically through the cross-border interbank payment system. Payments are being directed through accounts at China's Kunlun Bank to completely bypass the SWIFT messaging network and neutralize Western economic sanctions. By forcing commercial vessels to use the CIPS network, Iran has effectively transformed the world's most critical maritime choke point into a dollar-free toll booth. This geopolitical maneuvering has created a bifurcated global oil market where crude traded within the yuan circuit receives a structural discount of up to $8 per barrel. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations are aggressively operationalizing their own blockchain-backed clearing architecture to bypass Western infrastructure entirely. The Reserve Bank of India is formally advancing a framework known as the BRICS Bridge, which focuses on central bank digital currency interoperability. This initiative is a primary agenda item for the upcoming BRICS Summit in New Delhi scheduled for September 2026. The goal is to create a multi-tier settlement system connecting national payment rails without ever requiring dollar intermediation. This BRICS pay infrastructure is not a theoretical concept, but an open-source, decentralized protocol that officially launched in 2024. It functions as an interoperability layer explicitly designed to connect India's UPI, China's CIPS, Russia's SPFS, and Brazil's PIX payment systems. Furthermore, prototype digital settlement instruments like the unit are being developed to use blockchain technology backed by 40% physical gold and 60% local currencies. These member nations are aggressively accumulating hard assets to back this new financial architecture, with BRICS central banks collectively holding over 6,000 tons of gold. And the underlying technical foundation for this transition is already processing massive amounts of institutional capital. The mBridge multi-CBDC platform recently processed roughly $55 billion in payments, with 95% of those transactions denominated exclusively in digital yuan. Now, you might look at your trading screens right now and notice that the United States dollar is paradoxically strengthening against foreign currencies. But this short-term price action is actually a symptom of the underlying geopolitical disease. Because America remains a net energy exporter, it's relatively insulated from the global supply shocks devastating European and Asian markets. Those foreign nations are currently hoarding dollars in a desperate attempt to afford emergency energy imports at inflated prices. And this temporary safe haven demand is masking a catastrophic structural fracture in the global reserve data. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has plummeted to 56.9%, marking the lowest level recorded in 3 decades. Which brings us to the ultimate endgame behind the International Monetary Fund's highly publicized reset session. The global financial elite understand perfectly well that the current unipolar fiat system is breaking down. Their solution is not to return to a decentralized standard, but rather to construct a multipolar currency system heavily reliant on programmable money. According to recent data, 137 countries, representing 98% of global gross domestic product, are now actively exploring or implementing central bank digital currencies. These institutions are building the ultimate surveillance state under the guise of increasing cross-border payment efficiency. Take a close look at the official Payments Vision 2028 roadmap published by the Reserve Bank of India. That document explicitly highlights programmable features, including switch-on and switch-off controls, extending to all digital payment modes. It mandates full transaction traceability through a centralized payment switching service that grants authorities total visibility into every single purchase. Over in China, the government recently reclassified digital Yuan balances as interest-bearing deposits, transforming the asset from a simple cash substitute into a competitive financial instrument. Local municipalities have already used smart contract functionality to issue targeted consumption vouchers with embedded expiration dates. They're demonstrating in real time that programmable spending controls are a fully operational reality rather than a theoretical concept. The European Central Bank is also advocating their digital euro preparation phase, with a distributed ledger technology solution known as the Pontus scheduled to launch in late 2026. This is the massive structural flaw hidden inside the institutional push for digital asset tokenization. When a central bank issues a digital currency, they retain the absolute power to restrict what categories of goods you could purchase. They possess the technological capability to program your funds to expire if they are not spent within a state-mandated time frame. They can implement geographic restrictions that confine your purchasing power to specific designated regions. Internal modeling conducted by the International Monetary Fund suggests that even a non-interest-bearing digital currency could capture 8% of the commercial deposit market. This perfectly illustrates the rule of 3 for institutional monetary capture. They capture the settlement layer. They capture the transaction data. And finally, they capture your financial sovereignty. That said, the United States stands as a bizarre outlier in this global transition, with the Senate recently passing legislation prohibiting the Federal Reserve from issuing a retail digital dollar. President Trump signed an executive order terminating all federal research and development of a retail central bank digital currency, citing severe risks to financial privacy. The administration simultaneously established a United States strategic Bitcoin reserve, capitalized with over 328,000 coins seized through federal forfeiture proceedings. They are explicitly positioning decentralized digital commodities as the fundamental contrast to state surveillance digital currencies. But even without a direct central bank currency, the newly established stablecoin regulatory frameworks require private issuers to possess the capability to freeze transactions upon lawful order. The Genius Act established the first federal stablecoin framework, mandating that private issuers maintain the technical capability to block transfers immediately. Furthermore, governments are implementing the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework to integrate decentralized assets into the broader regulatory tax and surveillance net. They are effectively replicating the exact same surveillance architecture through heavily regulated corporate intermediaries. So, how should investors navigate this unprecedented transition away from the legacy financial system? On one hand, the short-term market dynamics are undeniably brutal for decentralized assets right now. Bitcoin has suffered a severe 22.5% drawdown since the beginning of the year, dropping to roughly $68,700. Meanwhile, gold has surged nearly 8% to reach massive new all-time highs above $4,700 per ounce. During periods of acute geopolitical panic, institutional capital instinctively flees towards the traditional physical safety of precious metals. The apex cryptocurrency is currently failing to demonstrate the immediate safe haven characteristics that, well, many maximalists promised that it would deliver. Even major institutional holders are feeling the immense pressure of this macroeconomic environment. Strategy Incorporated currently holds over 762,000 Bitcoin, with an average cost basis of roughly $75,600 per coin. That means that the most aggressive institutional accumulator on the planet is currently underwater by approximately $6 billion. On the other hand, the long-term structural case for permissionless innovation has never been more critically important. As global elites actively attempt to replace the dying fiat architecture with programmable digital currencies, you are being forced to make a definitive choice. Bitcoin operates on a peer-to-peer network with absolutely no central authority that can freeze your accounts or program spending restrictions. It is a protocol-native digital commodity that possesses no issuer, no promoter, and absolutely no counterparty risk. BlackRock understands this foundational value proposition, which is exactly why their spot exchange-traded fund continues to hold approximately 775,000 Bitcoin, despite the current market volatility. In a world where governments are openly building the infrastructure to dictate exactly how and when you could spend your money, censorship resistance becomes the most valuable fundamental metric on Earth. The choice you face is not simply deciding between holding digital gold or physical gold in your portfolio. The choice is whether you want to remain trapped inside a financial system that can program your money or step outside into a network that cannot. But what do you think about this massive institutional shift? Are you going to opt into this highly coordinated, programmable digital currency reset? Or is decentralized crypto the only true escape hatch left for everyday users? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to understand the hidden mechanisms behind the recent stablecoin regulatory frameworks, you can check out our video on that right over here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is Lewis, signing off.